Now, this is the earliest map we have of the town, giving us an idea of the properties that were in the town. Again, the properties are not all done as individual houses. If somebody has a lease on more than one house, it's just drawn as one property. And the names of the people who live in most of these houses are known to us. This map was drawn in 1839, a bit short of 200 years ago, and it was actually drawn by Richard Griffith, who did the Griffiths valuation when he was a private architect. Now, my view on it is, remembering that the second last Lord Blayney died in 1834, his son Cadwallader became the Lord, and his whole intention was to sell the estate. And I think he's planning here to see how is his property divided up, so when he does eventually sell the properties, he'll know exactly who's in each house and who owes him rent and who doesn't owe him rent. And this is a list of the people who lived in the houses on that side of Main Street in 1839. And the first house, which is the one at the very bottom, where Quinn's shop is today, you know, down starting at New Street, was a woman called Beatrice Hamilton. Now, I know nothing about Beatrice, except she's living. Now, if you look at the map, you will see there aren't 3 large houses here. There are actually 4 small houses with a common backyard. So obviously at some stage, these 4 houses were, these 4 little houses were knocked down, and the modern 3-story houses were built in place of them. The second little house in was Terence Duffy, not quite sure who Terence was, and the third one was Bernard Brannigan, who had a pub. Now, when we say a pub, we tend to mean just, well, he had a front room with a few bottles of poaching in it, probably, or something fairly big. It's not a big sit-down pub. He's selling drink. He's a wine spirit dealer, which sounds really, really good, but I'm not sure how big a business premises he has, because his front room is only 1 room wide, so he's not going to fit too many into it. But he had a pub there. And the 4th little house belonged to a man called Philip Rudden. Now, I'm not sure if that's the same Ruddens who had the pub across the street in a later generation, but he's there. Then we have James Gray, George Hamilton, Andrew McMath then owns, and those are the 3 houses which are a little bit bigger than the others. Jerry Atkinson's, the Emerald Bar, you know, those slightly bigger sites. And the next one, if you look at it here, you will see number 8, which is here, 11 houses. Okay? The individual houses are not listed. Lowy has the lease on all of them, so they're put together as one property. And you can even see on the map of 1839, you see the gap here at the back? That's Skinner's Alley. So people will come in here. Lowy owns this bit and owns this bit, or leases it, I would say own, but leases it. And this open space here is Malloy's Meadow, or Ward's Meadow as we called it. Now, what's unusual about this is that the original townland of Onamy, and townlands remain very important in Ireland, the boundary of Onamy originally came down to here, roughly where the Scout Hall is, and went at a funny angle, and then came back up, went back down, went out into a funny angle, and then across here, and went straight across to the back, on the backs of those houses, and came out at the entrance to New Street. That's not true today. In the 1860s, when rateable valuations were worked out, they moved the boundary of Onamy across to the line of the middle of York Street. So the houses on one side of York Street today are in Connerbury, and the other side of York Street is in Onamy, but originally they were all in Onamy, because the boundary of Onamy is very odd shaped. There's a little stream running down there, and you follow the boundary. Go along all the way up here. The next house, number 9, is this one, and that's where James Lowy himself lived, and that's a bigger house than all the 11 ones that he's renting out. And he's got his woolen drapery shop there, doing his business. And then here at the back of, beside the Ward's Meadow, is where he built the tannery. And all these buildings here are associated with the tannery. And the dirtiest job that there is in a tannery is getting the skins of the cattle, and scraping off the hair from the front of the skin, and then scraping the fat and the meat from the inside of the skin. And the men who did that were called skinners. And 4 little houses were built in Skinner's Alley. And these poor fellas who had this dirty job of skinning animals lived in those little houses. Lowy gave them the houses to live in, which is why it's known as Skinner's Alley. Now, Lowy's tannery was there till about 1860s, 1870s. And leather is very important. There's no plastic in those days. Leather is used for almost everything. And we had 2 tanneries in the house, the one here in Main Street and then one down in Market Square as well, both producing large amounts of leather. When you go past Lowy, you'll see in house number 10, you have Owen Callan, William McKee. Owen Callan, by the way, is a baker, McKee, and then there's the next name there, Matthew Mooney, who had a pub in that one, and that's the mascot, okay? The next one after that is William Malloy. And this here is William Malloy's property. That's Coogan's Yard, okay? Malloy's owned it. He was an iron and coal merchant, as well as grocery shop at the front of the shop. And all these stores in his backyard is where he stored the coal and the iron, and he sold ploughs and hammers and all sorts of ironmongery. And that was Malloy's. Jonathan Graham comes next to Malloy, and that is Livingston's shop. And Graham was a wheelwright or a cart maker, and he's building his carts in that shop. And that is another of the big skills that existed in those days, repairing cart wheels, which had to be done very, very regularly, and then the building of the carts. And Graham is one. Honora McMahon, which is a lovely first name, Honora, is in the next shop, which would be the Cozy Cafe, and she's got a grocer's shop there. And then a man called Callan is in the corner. There's 2 houses where the Ballymacmanus is today, and a man called Callan is living in the corner house, and he's got a grocery shop where the Ballymacmanus is today. And those are the people who were living here in 1839. The Skinners. Lowy is the big businessman, making plenty of money. Malloy is making plenty of money because he's got one of the biggest businesses in the town. But there's also a few small pubs, a couple of grocery shops, a bakery, and so on, which is a typical growing town in 1839. Now, Charles Malloy and the Malloys were one of the oldest families in the town. The Malloys came here on the 20th of April 1717, which is 207 years ago. And they were given a farm out at Tulliskerry. Now, Tulliskerry is, if you go out the Lahagish Road to Blackhill football field, it's the area into the right there, where you can go over onto the Mile Hill. You know, that's Tulliskerry townland. And they were given a big farm there. Eventually, Malloy comes into town and decides to open a business, as a lot of them did at that stage. He was given 79 acres in Tulliskerry and 4 acres of bog, and paid £10 10 shillings, which of course is 10 guineas. And you list on your lease the lives of certain people, right? And the 3 lives he put on his lease were Joseph Malloy, his son, Charles himself, and Sarah, his eldest daughter, Sarah Malloy. Now, what it means by having a name on your lease is, as long as one of those 3 people were still alive, the lease continued, right? So you put your children onto it rather than your granny, okay? Someone who's going to live a fair long time. And if all the 3 people die, you can then add an extra name to your lease by paying an extra year's rent. So Lord Blaney makes extra money, and you have, technically, the Malloys had the property forever, as long as they kept replacing the names on the lease. But of course, our land commission all sorted all that out. Now, Sarah Malloy is very important because Sarah Malloy married a man called John Stewart around about 1718, and they had a son called James Stewart, who was the first man to be born in Castleblayney, to grow up in Castleblayney, to be baptised in Castleblayney, to make his first communion up in St Maldows, to live his whole life in Castleblayney. He didn't marry, and he died when he was about 21 or 22 in Castleblayney. He's the first person that I have worked out who completed his lifetime in Castleblayney, and his headstone is up in St Maldows graveyard, and you can read it up there, given the date. I think he died about 1739, when he was about 21 or 22, and his mother was Sarah Malloy. The Malloys were there until Coogans moved in, I think the late 1950s, and Mrs. Malloy was still living across the street here in the early 1960s. Now, one of Harry Malloy's daughters married Graham, is that right, Daphne? Yes. The solicitor, George Graham, the solicitor, and they had two daughters anyway.
Two daughters, Rosemary and Anne.
Rosemary and Anne. And so the Grahams then are descended from the Malloys and were in the town until the 1980s, possibly 70s, 80s. We're still there in the town as well. So a continuous family, an important family in terms, and the meadow at the back was called Malloy's Meadow. Now here you see the houses, just taking this side of the street here at the moment, the Ballymacmanus, these are all bigger houses, and then you have the line of small houses coming down here, mostly single houses as you went along. In other words, James Lowy's 11 houses. By 1861, when the Griffiths valuation was written, obviously some of the families have gone and some have changed, and some have people have moved, but generally speaking it hasn't changed all that much in terms of, sorry, just my map here, and this is the map of the town in 1861. You can see again, starting at this end, there are 4 small houses down where Quinn's shop is, then there's a gateway, then there's a number of large houses here, and then Brendan Hughes's, and so on, 3 small houses. Skinner's Alley is still there, and then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that's 11. There's still 11 houses there in 1861, and then Lowy's was here. This big house was Malloy's, Coogan's shop, and then there are 3 houses up to the end, Livingstone's, the Cosy Cafe, and then Ballymacmanus on the corner. Now the people who lived in these houses are listed on the right hand side there. From the far side of the street, William Gray, and we had a Gray there in 1839, Stephen McNamara, whose relatives were home here about 10 years ago, I think Stephen McNamara may have been a carpenter, Patrick Flanagan, Michael Tierney, Edward McIlerney, William Owens, these are the people, and then you will come to 54. Now 54 is the tannery itself at the back, and you see what it says here, 54 unoccupied. By 1861 the tannery is closed, but it still belongs to the Lowy's, the property. William Highland, Ward Lewis, at house number 60, one of these small houses, a man called the wonderful name of Ulysses Morris. Now Ulysses Morris was a painter, decorator and a glazier, and lived in the town for quite a while. Mary Maguire, Bernard McSally, another Lowy, Brannigan McGrath, and then on to number 69, William Malloy. And Malloy owns 2 properties. He owns the shop at the front, number 69, and he owns number 69A, which is the meadow at the back of the houses. He still owns the meadow. We then come to James Rooney, Hugh McCaffrey, Thomas Graham, who's a wheelwright cart maker, and then in Ballymacmanus we have Peter Smith. And Peter Smith is the beginning of the Smith dynasty on the corner, which later on becomes Patrick Smith and the coroner, the registrar for County Mon, PJ, was he? Patrick. And they eventually move out to the big house out the Dundalk Road, and they give the name to the lake as Smith's Lake. They live the house which Harry Hughes lives in today. And the Smiths begin in the corner, but they begin to build up a really good premises, because not only do they build up as a coach stop, eventually they build up and they sell tickets for cross-Atlantic, anyone going cross-Atlantic. They were agents for the Cunard line, right? Now, all of these people had, let's say, different occupations. Bakers, candlestick makers, whatever else. Edward McIlerney, who's there, was a butcher. William Gray, at the top, was a shoemaker. Patrick Flanagan worked on leather cutting and making leather. James Cairns had a small shop, and when he died, his wife, his widow, opened a dressmaking milliner's shop. William Ward was also a shoemaker. Ulysses was the painter glazier. James Brannigan had a pub. Eliza Callan, who's somewhere down there as well, sorry, she's just missing there, she's below Bernard McGrath. Eliza Callan was a baker. And all the different, Malloy's, of course, were still an ironmonger's and grocery shop in the one building. Now, there's an interesting fellow at number, where has he gone? That's right. 67. Just take this down up a little bit. '67 is Patrick Breen. Now, I did mention last week the Joe Breen family who lived up in New Street. Patrick Breen, I'm not sure, was related to the Breens of New Street, but Patrick Breen was the town sergeant, right? Now, the town sergeant by this stage is a sort of an honorary position. Originally, the town sergeant would have been responsible for safety and security on the streets and making sure everything's going. By this stage, it's just become an elected position, and he was the last town sergeant. Now, not a policeman, this is a title he had. He was the town sergeant, and technically he would be responsible for safety in the town and making sure all the gates were closed at night and all that sort of stuff in English towns. Of course, when the police force come, the police force take over all of those duties. And he's living in a very, very small house. Now, by 1901, the town is beginning to expand, and where the tannery was originally, there's now a blacksmith's forge. And the blacksmith's forge there was McQuaid's blacksmith's forge, and McQuaid's lived in the house just below Skinner's Alley, on the other side of Skinner's Alley. And blacksmith's forges were not allowed to be built on the main street or in any street, because of course they're liable to catch fire and burn the town down. So they're always put well back, and of course there's one on the other side of the street that I'll come to in a moment. Now, this is a list of the people who were living in that side of Main Street or New Street in 1901. Down at the bottom, trainers were in the first one. And coming up that side of the street where there were 4 houses, you have James Casey, who's a carter, and there's still Caseys in the town. Thomas Garland was a labourer, and William Maxwell, who's a shoemaker. Now, that William Maxwell had a son called James, who had a son called Jimmy Maxwell. It's the first of the 3 generations of the Maxwells. This Maxwell still lived in that house, the 3rd last house in Main Street, into his later years. His son then moved down Muckle Street, and then the later Jimmy moved up to the square. A woman called Mary Finnegan is running a boarding house in a tiny little house now. I don't know how many boarders she put into it. But the next one, number 67, is Cormac Duffy's pub. And Cormac Duffy is an important... Sorry, go back to Cormac Duffy. Now, Cormac Duffy's wife was a sister of Dr. Con Ward. Con Ward, who later on became the Fianna Fáil Minister for Health and served many, many years in the Fianna Fáil government. Now, the Wards were born in Tullycarra, right? As you go up the Carrick Road, You all know what Tullycarra is. And you drive into Castle Ross, you know the little road that goes into Castle Ross. Just before that, there's a crossroads. Turn right at the crossroads there, and Ward's farm was just the first farm on the right-hand side as you go down that road. Now, Con Ward's mother died very young. And Con Ward was only about, 10 or 11 years of age. You see his name on the list, Cornelius Ward. The Wards actually baptised two of their sons. One was called Cornelius Ward, and the other was called Constantine Ward. And I presume they both could be called Con Ward, but this man is Cornelius Ward, this is Con Ward. And when his mother dies, as happened in those days, the children are then sent to his aunt to raise him. And his aunt is Mrs. Duffy, Cormac Duffy's wife. So Con Ward comes to the town and did a year or so in the Beach Corner at school here. But then Mrs. Duffy died. So now he's got no aunt in the house either, and then he's moved away to some other relative somewhere else and didn't come back. His brother Constantine, of course, went to Maynooth, eventually became a priest, and for many, many years he was the rector at Lough Derg every summer, and people would have known from the other father, Con Ward. The daughter of the family, if you look down there, Bridget Duffy, you see Bridget here, is only 8 years old in 1901. So by 1918, 1919, she decides to become a Republican and tries to join the IRA. Now, whether she actually gets joining the IRA or not, I don't know. She certainly was in Cumann na Món and plays a leading role in the independence movement in Castleblayney. Does a lot of strange things. When Patrick McKenna was killed out at the attack on the Flemings out the road, Patrick McKenna was shot and killed. They brought him into town, and Bridget Duffy, who was also known as Baby Duffy, you've all heard of Baby Duffy? Yes. Baby Duffy then took the body up to St Mary's Hospital, the workhouse, and she cleaned up the body and prepared it. Now, there's always been a doubt as to where they buried Patrick McKenna the first time he was buried. He seems to have been buried about 4 different times. But anyway, I thought he was buried in the graveyard here in town in a secret grave at night. Somebody else said no, he was buried down the alley. Paddy Carraher is the story, and probably the true one. They buried him in the famine pit, you know, the graveyard at the back of the workhouse, and they put his body in there after she had done him up and prepared him for burial. And then the Gold Watch story, which I'm not going to tell again. But anyway, Patrick was eventually, after the Troubles ended, was dug up and taken down and put into the family plot in St Mary's Church here in town. Baby Duffy also, when the two McEnany boys were killed out at Carna in the ambush, the bodies were taken into St Mary's Hospital, and she was brought up and she cleaned the two bodies up for them to be buried. Now, they were buried in proper ceremonies out at Aniala, and she was involved in that. And every time something would happen in the town, the pub was raided and they were looking for what probably she was up to. For many years later, she had a running battle with the Irish government looking for a pension and trying to get an IRA pension, which they wouldn't give to her because she'd never been in the IRA. But I'd have to say she probably did an awful lot more trouble around the town than most of the IRA boys ever did. She seems to have been a very, very tough lady. She's worth a biography, I think. Now, when you come on down the street, sorry, this is it here, we're now looking at the houses. You can see today where the 4 small houses were have been replaced by 3 large 3-storey houses. These were 4 small houses. This one, Peter Flanagan's, is Cormac Duffy's. That was Duffy's pub there. And then you move on up the street, the 11 houses were here, and Lowy's as we go on up the street. So Cormac Duffy's were a very big pub at one stage. Now as you come on down this, sorry, that's him again, this is, that's the same one, sorry. This is a list then of all the other people who lived in Main Street. I'm going to try, and people who know the street will know what I'm talking about. If you don't, I'm coming up the left-hand side up towards the Ballymacmanus. The first name we have here is Patrick McAree, who's a car owner. Now he's a car owner for hire, but it's not a motor car, it's a horse and trap. He's a taxi driver. and he rents out and he's a car hire. Now Patrick McAree came from Ballinode up at Scottstown, related probably to the McAree Engineerings who are there today, and he came to Castleblayney and was in Brendan Hughes's shop, right, and rented out. He was married here and had a number of sons. Thomas, right, his eldest son, is Tommy McAree. Later on was a major politician in the town, served on the Urban Council, served as chairman of the Urban Council for many, many years. But at this stage, he's a hotel porter. And I mentioned him before, he was called a bootsy. In other words, he worked over in the Hope Arms Hotel, and one of his major jobs was that all the people who were staying in the hotel at night would leave their boots and shoes out in the corridor, and Tommy would go around and collect them all and bring them downstairs and polish them and shine them up and leave them back. So when the posh people come up in the morning, they had lovely shiny shoes and boots to put on, and Tommy was the bootsy. He eventually, of course, went down up the street and bought the pub, and Junior McAree is his grandson. The other people who were there, Sarah McAree, were all around the town and married in the town, but the last name in it, of course, is Joseph McAree. And this is Joe, and Joe was a member of the IRA definitely during the War of Independence, arrested a number of times, kept getting something that happened in the town, the police would come and beat poor Joe up, and then Joe eventually, he ended in Ballykindler, did he, Pax?
He was arrested a couple of times.
He was arrested a number of times, taken off the Crumlin Road and charged with this, that and the other, and was definitely involved the first night they went out to the Flemings. Joe was there that night when Patrick McKenna was killed. I don't know if he was there the second night. There's some doubts as to who was there the second night.
Thomas Ballard, he was in the British Army and he served in the war.
Who's that? Sorry?
The Thomas Ballard.
Yes, he served in the war. Thomas didn't serve in the IRA. In fact, he seemed to be very much on the other side, right?
He was shot in the arm and he was discharged with a bad arm.
Right. So he was in Connaught Rifles or the Rangers? No.
He joined what do you call it? The Royal Field Artillery or the artillery anyway.
Right.
And he was discharged for being wounded. So.
He was wounded. Wounded.
No. But he re-enlisted under a different name.
Right.
He joined the Royal Irish Rifles.
Right.
And he was in Dublin the day of the famine or the rising. He fought in Dublin. Against.
Yes, on the wrong side. Sorry.
Well, he didn't probably see it that way.
No, he didn't see it that way. Certainly Joe, his brother, would have seen it that way.
He was home. He was home. He was in Gallipoli and he got dysentery and he said he was home sick and that's why he was.
Right.
He was sick leave or whatever. And that's why he had to be in Portobello.
Right.
And then he was
in Dublin.
Put into duty. All the way in Dublin and was put into duty that week.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So he was at Gallipoli as well.
He was.
Right.
That's
Yes. That's where he got wounded.
He got dysentery and then I think he went. He went back then after that. He served. Probably in France or something.
Yes. Mad keen to get involved. Thomas didn't have a lot of time because when Joe went to America.
Joe was involved before that as well. He was from about 1912. Anything was going on, he was involved.
He was involved in it. Yeah. Barney was with him, yeah. We'll come to Barney in a minute. Now, Joe died in America, and we'll leave out his death for the moment. We thought he was shot away. He wasn't shot. He died of roughly normal death. And then the American authorities wrote home to Castleblayney to Tommy, asking for money to be sent out to bury Joe in New York, and Tommy refused to send the money. So Clanagale in New York got together and raised the funds, I think.
The Penny people there, the kids that was out there from Penny.
Yeah, they raised the money.
I think a Penny man supplied the plot for burying them.
Right, and Joe was in New York buried. Yeah, that's where he ended up. Coming on down the street, the second house, the one in the middle there beside Brendan Hughes's, was Edward McBride, a baker. But Edward McBride, the baker, then moved across the street and was in Mickey Burns's shop directly opposite later on, and had his bakery down Burns's yard at one stage. Michael McQuaid is the blacksmith, and his forge was back where the tannery was, up Skinner's Alley, and of course he's living in the nearest house to Skinner's Alley. Hugh McKenna, right, is in the first house that's coming up the street. Patrick Kelly, I don't know. Patrick Comiskey, and the Comiskies would still be in the town, was a platelayer with the GNR. A very strange name here, Anne Bannigan. I'm thinking this must be Bannigan, spelt wrongly, but I'm not sure. Catherine Micklin, anyone can tell me. John Conlon, Patrick Rooney, who's a chimney sweep, right? A few of those about. Patrick Rooney, Francis Kerr, who's a stonemason, Bridget McGuigan is a seamstress, and John Brannigan is a mason. These are the people who are all living in the small 11 houses as you keep coming up the street. As you move on up, Patrick McCardle, Terence Brannigan, Elizabeth McMahon, Mary Ann Morris, I think is a daughter of Ulysses Morris, the painter glazier, William Lowy, and now we're into the Lowys, the Duffys, and at number 90, the third one from the bottom there is John O'Brien. And John O'Brien, of course, had a pub, which is today the Spinning Wheel, although it was only a single shop rather than the 3 shops that it is today. And that was John O'Brien, who was a major publican in the town. He had a real pub rather than the boys who just had the she-beans, shall we say. Margaret Callan, and then Patrick Breen is at the bottom there, leading us round to James Callahan, who was an Enniskillen man who was a tailor. His son Mervyn Callahan married my grandaunt. And then Hannah Malloy, right, who's the coal merchant, iron merchant in Coogan's shop. Her son there, Harry, was the last of the Malloys in the business. And the next one now, 95, by 1901, Robert Spence has appeared on the scenes, and Spence has had a chemist shop next door to Coogan's on the town side. James McCardle's a labourer, which would be Livingston's shop. James Lunny is a tailor in what's now the Cozy Cafe. And then Patrick Smith is a grocer, spirit merchant, and he's living in the corner house, Ballymacmanus house today. Now Patrick Smith there has a daughter called Katie, and people would remember Katie Smith. She finished her life here in the square in the last house down this side of the street here. She was a daughter of the Patrick Smith. The Smiths eventually move out to Smith's Lake and live out the Carrick Road. Patrick Comiskey is the shop assistant, which was known in town as the shop boy. Right. Now, my father had memories of these people as well, and he wrote down, I haven't taken the Northern Standard list because they give the whole of Main Street, and it was too long to try and separate upper from lower, so I didn't write it. And these were his memories of Main Street from Ballymacmanus down to that end of the town, okay? Going from Ballymacmanus back down again. Patrick Smith was a publican. Charlie Callan had a small ice cream shop. No, that was the Callans of Dorothy Callan's connection, and Zeta, and the Callans that we know, and that lad who stood for election recently is connected as well, isn't he? Number 3 then, Jimmy Livingston, ex-RIC constable, who took the pension and was a watchmaker and a fisherman, and all sorts of other stuff as well. Spence the chemist. Harry Malloy is still there, he's a hardware man. And then we go Joe Moore, Paddy Breen, the town sergeant, John O'Brien in the pub, what is now the Spinning Wheel, James McMahon, a postman, and he gets another mention because he's an uncle of my father's, Paddy Flood, a peddler, whose nickname was Let the Monkey Out of the Box. I have no idea what that was, and I never asked what at the time, but that's what he was called, Let the Monkey Out of the Box. John Flanagan, the railway. Now we all remember John Flanagan, lived in the different houses there along the main street, lived until he was 90. He's the hacker, he was the original hacker, Tom Flanagan's father, and very nice man, pleasant man. Ellie Brannigan has an Ayton house, as we call them. Now, the 4 people who lived up Skinner's Alley were Jack Conley, who was known as the Baw Conley. I have no idea what that means. These are all strange. Frank Sheridan, who was the bellman, Liam Frank, And if there was an announcement to be made in the town, say there's a circus in the Commons, or there's something on, or there's a concert in the town hall or something, Frank would go up and down the town ringing the bell. He was the town crier, and he would shout out, "Circus!" No, never ever do this. He was the bellman. He was known as Liam Frank. He was Liam. Rosie Comiskey lived in there, and she was the Toe Comiskey's, Rosie Toe. Please don't, these names come up all the time. And then Eddie Woods, who was a peddler, and he lived up Skinner's Alley as well. Now we're gone past Skinner's Alley. The first house is McQuaid the blacksmith, Mickey Coogan the watchmaker, people would remember, Paddy McAree, that's Tommy's father, who's a car hire, James Hanworthy, a grocer, Eddie Duffy, Cormac Duffy, Dinny O'Keefe. Somebody had asked me about Dinny O'Keefe. I'd never heard the name before, but he was a post office lineman. He's a lineman for the county. Yeah, and that's him there. William Maxwell and Roseanne Garland, Harry Casey on down that side of the street. And these, my father is, by the way, there's an awful lot of other nicknames in it which I don't print for obvious. Some of the nicknames can be a bit near the bone. Right? So I don't. But Let the Monkey Out of the Box, I'd have to say, is the best I've heard yet. Now, this is that lower end of Main Street, and here we have the one that's just cut off is McQuaid's, the blacksmith. This, of course, is Mickey Coogan's. Yes. And this here was Paddy McAree's shop. That's where Tommy McAree and Joe McAree, they were all born, right? And then you can see that that's the end of the little one houses. After this now we suddenly have 3-story houses. And they're much bigger houses the whole way down to the street because the smaller houses were knocked down at some stage and rebuilt as 3-story houses. I don't know who the man on the ladder, I assume that's Des Kiernan, who's painting that house. There are 2 men standing here. Do you see these fellas here? The man on the left is Barney McNally. There is no mistake in the stand of Barney McNally. Right? This is one of the Blewett photographs, and is a fabulous photograph, of course, of Spence's chemist shop on this side of the street. And next door to it, they got a great photograph of Coogan's as well, which today is just a blank canvas. And that's Coogan's, which became Rice Brothers, and then they moved out of there. Both are very much a 70s shop fronts. They're not traditional shop fronts. Well, Coogan's maybe a little bit.
The groceries.
Sorry? This is inside the shop. The man on the left is Tony Blewett, and he's the man who took the photographs. He was a chemist in Spence's for a couple of years. The lady, of course, is Sheila Beattie. We know her. And again, a typical chemist shop with all the bottles and all the chems, all the of it. Now, there are many advertisements. This is one for Spence's tea. "'Tis worth the winds. Try Spence's tea. A splendid tea, fine fragrant flavour, deep rich liqueur at 1 8 a pound." He goes on to say everything he's selling in his grocery shop. He's both a grocer and a chemist. Tinned fruits, meats, fish, vinegars, sauces, beef extracts, Bovril, Liebigs, and Sybils. No, I don't remember any of those things. He goes on then. Farinaceous foods. Can anyone tell me what a farinaceous food is? He's selling them anyway. I don't know what a farinaceous food is. Irish and American bacon and ham, smoked and pale. Jacob's biscuits. And that would have been the beginning of the big biscuit companies, Jacob's coming here. Pipes, fancy tobacco, cigars, cigarettes, etc. And then he goes on to the drugs department, and he's also selling toilet soaps, perfumes, Virolia preparations, hair washes, oils, what's that? Pomades, veterinary medicines, paintings, all at lowest prices. He really is selling everything. Or Robert Spence, wholesale and family grocer, and so on and so forth. And at the very bottom it also says he's the agent for English bread. And the idea of shop bread is now coming into the late 19th century. People start eating shop bread, and shop bread meaning the women aren't making the bread at home, they're going down to the shop and buying the sliced pans or whatever else, and he's the English one. Now, English have a little bit of a problem in Castleblayney in 1920. A malicious injury application by Messrs. English of Belfast for the burning of the bread van 2 bread service baskets, a pair of horses' reins, 1 waterproof cover for the bread van, and a quantity of bread on the 16th of April in Castleblayney. The chairman remarked that this was not burnt when it should have been. It was actually burnt about 3 months after the truce was signed. So his attitude was, it should have been burnt before the troubles ended and not afterwards. He said it was not burned when it should have been, and it was burnt when it shouldn't have been. The clerk of the court said the provisional government, this would be the new Free State government, published 2 notices with regard to malicious injury claims, and then they had to decide what action they should take. The man, of course, who burnt the bread van was Barney McNally. And my father, at about 10 or 12 years of age, was a witness as Barney came out and fired a shot in the air, told the bread driver to get down and get back to Belfast as quick as he could, and stood the thing in the middle of the street. They unhooked the horse, and then they burnt the bread van in the middle of the main street. Okay? They weren't arrested. There was all that sort of interim period before the Civil War had started and after the truce had been signed. But the bread van was burnt in front of Spence's shop in the middle of the main street by Barney McNally. Now, also the same week, Monday last was the general holiday in town, and a good many people visited the Rocks. Now, if you have to be told where the Rocks are, you should know that. The Rocks is a place that is the strangest climate anywhere in the world. At 2 o'clock on a Sunday it starts to rain, and it rains until 4 o'clock on a Friday. And when you're there on your holidays, it rains all the time you're there. It always rained in it. And then when you're on your way home on the Friday evening, the sun comes out. Your holiday always lasted from Sunday to Friday, so the woman in the lodging house could use Saturday to wash all the linens, and then the next gang would come on the Sunday for the next week. But it always rained at the Rocks. Of course, all the sports. Now, a sport is a betting man. All the sports went to Baldoyle races, but we did not hear how they fared. There were occasional heavy showers. Now, this is August 1922. There were occasional heavy showers during the day, and the evening turned out fine, however. Much disappointment prevailed when it became known that the excursion to Warren Point was called off, in the Sharabang was called off, because the requisite number of people had not booked to go. So it was disappointing. We didn't get on the Sharabang to Warren Point for the day out. This is a report of a hockey match played on the Laurel Inn. I just put this one up to show you quite a number of the people who ran businesses in the Lower Main Street. The second man in here is Harry Malloy. Okay? The man who's over here, second last man, is P.J. Smith, Ballymacmanus, the corner in Ballymacmanus. This is James Carraher, and we'll meet the Carrahers in a moment. The man here with the fabulous moustache is Robert Spence, as a young man and a hockey player. So Spence and Malloy and Smith all had business premises on that end of the Lower Main Street. Barney Kyle is here, that's John G. Reid, the solicitor. Willie McGrath's at the front here. And so they go up to Laurel Hill, they play their hockey, and that's their recreation on Sunday. Very much larger businessmen and dignitaries of the town rather than not too many fog swappers on it. Now, when you get to the corner in Smith's had eventually a pub in Ballymacmanus, they had a grocery shop at one stage, but they also were the agents for the Cunard line, right? And the Cunard line sold tickets for the steamers, Liverpool to New York, Liverpool to Boston. The fares were £12 for a salon, right? £8 for a second class cabin, 5 guineas for third class. That's a fair bit of money to be paying to get, but remember, it's a one-way ticket you buy. A 10% reduction at certain times of the year. Passengers booked to all parts of America and Canada. The Cunard Steamship Company, Water Street, Liverpool. Their agents are two in Monaghan Town, Gray Brothers in Ballybay, and Patrick Smith on the corner of Main Street here in town, and he sells the tickets. Now, a lot of people have the view that all of the immigrants who left here all went on big ships like the Titanic to get to America. Well, the ones who went on the Titanic didn't get to America, but generally speaking, you think of that film and that it wasn't. Most of the steamships that people got tickets for here were relatively smaller ships. And this here is the SS Batavia, which between about 1880 and 1910, quite a lot of our people, it's a Cunard line, and it took the Irish immigrants, Castleblayney immigrants, to either New York or Boston. In fact, my cousins, ones who went out, I discovered all the lists of immigrants are all online, and it showed where they were. They were in third class on this SS Batavia, heading for New York, and ended up in New York. Right? To get from here to the Batavia, you got on the train in the railway station in Castleblayney and took the train to Dundalk, and from Dundalk went out to Greenore, and the ferry then went from Greenore across to Holyhead, and from Holyhead then you got a railway into Liverpool and got the ship in Liverpool. Now it was actually easier to get from here to Liverpool than it was to get from here to Cove, even though the ship came round and stopped in Cove on the way it passed. It was easier to go to Liverpool and get your ticket from Liverpool to New York rather than going down to Cork. And Patrick Smith sold all the, there was also an agent, McGahan was an agent for some of the companies as well, maybe the White Star Line, some of the other lines who were selling tickets to New York as well. But certainly Patrick Smith sold a lot of the tickets that Castleblayney immigrants. Sorry.
My dad tells me the story about Patrick Smith, Patrick Smith in, I think, 51. But he tells me the story that Patrick Smith was involved in tourism and he sold the tickets, is what you're seeing there. But he also, I think, could have been a senator at one stage.
A senator?
Yeah. And he was in the Dáil when he befriended John F. Kennedy's father, over the years. So when John F. Kennedy went back to America, John F. Kennedy's father was an ambassador to Ireland at one stage.
Well, Joe the father, yeah.
Dublin, he was on the ambassador.
Was he not in Dublin?
No.
But anyway, Patrick Smith knew John F. Kennedy's father, but at one stage he came to visit Castleblayney, and he took his two eldest sons, which would be John and Robert.
No, Joe.
John and Joe Warren. And he stayed out at Smith's Smith's house out there. And on time to visit Castleblayney.
What actually happened was P.J. Smith, Patrick Smith, had a brother who emigrated to Boston. And when he got to Boston, he became very friendly with the eldest of the Kennedys, Joe. In fact, I think they may both have been in the Navy or the Naval Reserve together at one stage. And so the Smiths knew the Kennedys. And then the old father, Joe, became ambassador to London and decided to come to visit Ireland and brought the family here to Ireland. Now, the young Kennedy girl, not Kathleen, the girl who had a slight... what was her name?
Rosemary?
No, Rosemary, who had the operation. She was here. And Rosemary stayed a week out in Smith's house, out at Smith's Lake. And when she went back to Boston, she sent a letter thanking the Smiths and people of Castleblayney for the lovely holiday she had in Castleblayney. And the letter is still in the possession of Michael Fisher. You know, Michael Fisher, of RTE reporter. Michael Fisher still has the copy of that letter because his mother was Smith. And he tells about that. There's a dispute how many of the boys came to Castleblayney. Definitely one of them did. And there's a dispute whether it was Joe or Jack. People always maintained it was the president who came. But they only stayed a night or so. They stayed a short time. But the sister stayed at least a week here, Rosemary, the Kennedys, because of Patrick's brother, who knew it was friendly with the Kennedys in Boston. And that's where the connection came from. And they were here, definitely. But they were definitely here, yes. Yeah. About 1938. This is our Corpus Christi procession, which goes to the top of the town and turns around and goes back down. And you would see there's a lot of pictures here. Now, just a very, very quick one here. This is a photograph taken of people who lived in that lower Main Street area. We haven't identified them all, but we do know that this woman here is Sarah Flanagan, with John Flanagan's wife. And this is Baby Duffy, right? And still dressed in sort of common man uniform. It's obviously wee Paddy is here.
Yeah.
And there's 3 men or 4 men carrying, well, one's got a hurley stick and the other appears to have a rifle. As to whether one of those is Joe McAree or not is a strong possibility. But this is a photograph that was taken either in Skinner's Alley or somewhere in that area of the town. I think all of the people in the photograph lived in that upper area of Main Street.
What year was that mean?
In about 1919, 1920. Now those who want to see Baby Duffy's headstone, it's the huge one in the Catholic graveyard, which is the big angel on the top of it. You know that one? You can go over and read that. Cormac Duffy and all the whole family are listed in that. We see them there. This is another photograph that was taken of the boys who lived in that area of the town. Now, without going through too many of them, we have Terry Carraher in it, right? That's Terencia's father. Charlie Callan of the ice cream shop. Patrick Comiskey, Charlie Malone across the street, Tommy Breen is there, Sandy Moore, Joe Breen is in it, Paddy Roach is in it, Joe Rudden from the pub and so on. The only thing I can't figure out is where that photograph was taken. It's a lane team, a Main Street, a Street League football team, but I can't, nothing about the background. Someone maybe can some way date that. No. We push on slightly faster.